Hello, all you hardcores out there. You know who it is. How you doing, Julian?
I'm all right, mate. How are you?
I'm all right. Uh, let's dive straight in then. Conor Ben, what's
Oh,
going on?
Conor Ben, well, according to Tony Sims and Eddie Hearn and Frank Smith, is clear to fight. He's clear to fight in the UK. He's clear to fight abroad. So Conor Ben apparently is boxing next weekend in, I think, Orlando or wherever, which is interesting because if he's clear to fight in the UK and he's stated that I want to box in the UK, this is really where I want to do it. Why is he going to fight if he does in some undercard, some obscure bill in the States instead of fighting in England?
Yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it? Really, how they've played it, isn't it? From day one.
Yeah, I mean, like I've said before, right? So Frank Warren, all right, as a rival promoter, him and Eddie, they're not going to announce their engagement anytime soon. But ultimately, Frank has said several times he's not had a hearing. Okay, he has not had a hearing, and it was in his system, and he's got off, or they've overturned that verdict temporarily on jurisdictional purposes. So if Frank Warren is being slanderous and not telling the truth, then you'd expect Matchroom to send him a legal letter, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But he's not, because everybody knows this is the biggest whitewash there's been in boxing for quite some time. And we know the history of Conor Ben, we know what's gone on. And no one's actually turned around and said there is no clomiphene in his system. Okay? So if that's not the case, and the 270 page, the first document which talked about, contamination, if that's not the case, and it is in his system, then strict liability applies. And that's the argument, I'm assuming, of the British Boxing Board of Control and of UCAD. It's in your system. If you can't explain it, then you're going to get a ban. If you can explain it, which apparently they're saying that the Dream Team 2, so the second lot of evidence, so forget the 270 pages, that's firewood now. The second defense they were saying was it's to do with the metaboloid, you can't say the word, I'm tired, mate, but the metaboloids in his system, the way that he clings on to certain things. So it's potentially had clomiphene ingested by food, by a dodgy food source, and they can prove that. But yet again, they've not had a hearing. They're not sitting down with the evidence in front of UCAD and the British Boxing Board of Control. They're challenging the suspensions based on jurisdiction. Now, if you had evidence, Russell, what absolved you of a crime, theft, murder, assault, whatever, and you had that evidence, would you present that evidence to the...
I would, yeah. I'd be going mad to present it.
Well, they haven't done, have they? So they're as guilty as sin. Everybody knows they're as guilty as sin, but money talks. I don't know what the situation is with the British Boxing Board of Control and UCAD and their subsequent appeal. What I do know is 5-6 weeks ago when they triggered that appeal, and Eddie was saying it's a quick process and it takes 2 weeks. I think someone reminded him actually it can take a couple of months. And I said to you at the time, any appeal takes time. These things could go on and on and on. So will Conor Ben fight next weekend? Truthfully, I have no idea, mate. I just want what's right's right. I want justice to be served. I want Conor Ben to be banned because it's in his system and strict liability applies. I don't care about the jurisdiction, whether it's technically correct or incorrect. What I care about are athletes going into the ring against other fighters with an unfair advantage, having taken performance-enhancing drugs. So I want Conor Ben to be banned. I want anybody show me anything or present anything that tells me anything to the contrary. I want him to serve his ban. But most of all, just like we all do, like everybody's calling for it, we want him to sit down with the relevant authorities. Because Eddie Hearn and Frank Smith, when they tell you that Conor Ben has done everything that's been asked of him, they're not stretching the truth. They're actually lying. So I'm calling you both liars now. I'm calling you all liars when you say that you've done everything that you've been asked of you, and I'm telling you, you haven't done everything that's been asked of you. You're lying. You're not stretching the truth. You're lying because you haven't sat down with the authorities and tried to explain why clomiphene was in your system. So stop lying.
Yeah, it's just going on and on, isn't it? They're going down that many avenues. It's like they want it to go away, isn't it?
So have you heard? I'll ask you. I know the answer to this. Have you heard anything that basically says it wasn't in this system? Have you heard them protest and say it wasn't recently? Have you heard them say there was no clomiphene in the system?
No.
So there's an acceptance from them, from that team, clearly, because the 270-page document didn't prove contamination. The WBC didn't agree with the contamination. So we are saying, Russell, that it's beyond any doubt that there was clomiphene in Conor Benn's system.
Yeah.
So that smashes that first big defence that they were talking about. There's no agenda and wrongdoing and corruption against Conor Benn like Conor Benn thinks. Do you think there is? I don't think there's an agenda.
I don't think there is, no.
So there's no agenda. So that's gone, right? So what you're now saying is, you're saying there's contamination, and you've got some evidence by this second set of scientists, what points to how you've ingested it orally by a food source. There was not enough trace in there for it to come from a performance-enhancing drugs, but from a food source. You've got the evidence, Conor. Sit down with UKAD, present the evidence, and you will be cleared, and the Boxing Board of Control will lift that suspension and license you to fight. But what I will say about Tony Sims and Eddie Hearn and Frank Smith, because I'm sick of hearing them. I'm sick of hearing them lying, saying he's cleared to fight and he can fight in the UK. Fight in the UK then. Why? I mean, there's so many questions around this, but one of the killer questions, Russell, is the British Boxing Board of Control are the regulators of sport in Great Britain. So we all know that. So if they are the regulators and they're effectively the primary licensing authority for British boxers to fight in this country, why have the British Boxing Board of Control and UKAD appealed the decision by the anti-doping panel to lift the ban? Why have they appealed the decision?
Because they know it's wrong, don't they?
Because they know it's got in his system, and they know strict liability is a technical law that applies to anti-doping, and they know he has to have a ban. And if you are getting turned over on a technicality, it's like getting away with causing death by dangerous driving or murder based on a technicality. That doesn't make it right, does it?
No.
It doesn't make it right. So
do you think it'll be swept away then, Julian, this?
I've no idea, but what we do know is the same.
His hearing got cancelled, didn't it?
Yeah, so the hearing got cancelled. I think Tony Sims said something about it was postponed, but the truth is I don't believe anything that comes out of anybody related to the Conor Benn camp. I don't believe any of them. They're proven to be a set of liars. Not people stretch the truth. They're proven to be a set of liars throughout this shameful episode. And even when the banter writes, nobody's asking them the right questions. Yeah. And when the questions do get pretty close to being an half-decent question, they wriggle out of it, they give a politician's answer, and then the journalists kind of just step away and say, well, I've got a bit brave there, I asked that question, and that's fine, is that? But like the Tony Sims interview, Conor Benn is free to fight. The next question would be, so are the British Boxing Board of Control going to license Conor Benn to fight then now? Are you saying he has got a British Boxing Board of Control license? That should be the next question. Well, no, technically he has to apply for it. Well, if he applies for it, are the British Boxing Board of Control going to grant him? Or while there's currently an appeal going on, is that likely to be delayed? Just ask those questions. And no one's asking the right questions, and no one has been out there from day one, apart from like yourself, Porky's Corner, Ultratech, Hatman, 4 or 5 other YouTubers who are kind of on the fringes are asking the right questions. Yeah. But ultimately it's not getting heard by the casuals. And I still read comments when it's anything related to Conor Benn in IFL, when you read some of the comments, and you still hear people say, what's your problem? Is being cleared. Conor Benn's been cleared. And it becomes a narrative. And as long as enough numpties believe that he's being cleared to put bums on seats in arenas, then I guess everything else is a foregone conclusion. But I've said from day one, I really want him to serve a ban. And it's nothing against Conor Benn. I wanted Canelo Alvarez to serve a ban. Tyson Fury served a ban, albeit semi-retirement, if you like. Hughie Fury served a ban. I want fighters who have tested positive, even if there is strict liability. You know, even if there is some doubt about how that got ingested in your system and where the source comes from, you have to serve a ban because we have to punish, sadly, we have to punish people who take performance-enhancing drugs, knowingly or not. Because unless someone pins you down and injects you, you need to be looking at what you're eating. You need to be looking at where you're shopping. You need to be looking at what source you're buying. You need to be looking at your proteins and your pre-workouts. All this stuff you need to be looking at because you're a professional and that's what you get paid for. So it's like anything when you go to court for anything, you'll know this. Ignorance is not defense, is it?
No.
So ignorance in all these boxers' cases I've just mentioned, it's not defense. So if a ban is good enough for some of the big names I've mentioned, including like Kid Galahad, early on in his career, Dillian White, if a ban's good enough for them, you cannot license Conor Benn because you're setting a precedent. You're setting a precedent which says jurisdiction, technicalities, just keep denying that I've taken anything knowingly. And you have to let me off because you set a precedent because you let Conor Benn off. And that's why we have to keep talking about this, Russell, until he's served a ban.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think they'll ban him, or do you think they'll just backdate it? And
I think the British Boxing Board of Control have been quite sturdy on this one. If you look back, even though there was some ambiguity at the beginning in terms of who was supposed to pull the show back in October of last year and who wasn't, the Board of Control have been pretty consistent on this. And I'll never say I was proud of the Board of Control because there's some of the treatment that obviously, you know, fighters I've been involved with have had. But Robert Smith and his team, good for them at the moment. You have to give them a little bit of credit. And I think they're battling it. They're battling that the decision was overturned. And they're clearly doing that because they want to give him a ban. Even if that ban, Russell, says, listen, we're going to ban you for 18 months or 12 months because there's some element of doubt in terms of this, that, or the other. We'll give you 18 months, we'll give you 12 months. But it has to go on record to say that he's served a ban for performance-enhancing drugs. Because what we can't have is we can't have this state of purgatory where nothing's talked about in terms of has he got a license, has he not got a license? One guy's saying he's free to box in the UK. The other guy's saying he's not free to box in the UK. So the Board of Control have to put something out on paper which says, as far as we're concerned, the suspension remains, or if he's successful with his appeal, he still has to step through the process. But as far as we're concerned, he hasn't proved that there was no clomiphene in his system. So we are going to apply a ban. I think they have to apply a ban. And surely, as the Board of Control, like we've said before, they're a law unto themselves. They can do, they're so powerful in terms of boxing in this country, or they were, that surely no matter what comes out of this anti-doping appeal, they can go down a different technical area and say, we're still going to give you a ban. Because ultimately that's the law, isn't it? Strict liability applies. UCAD are the ones who've done the investigation. VAD are the ones who provided the test results to UCAD. And based on the findings, they've said it's in your system. It's an open and shut case, Russell. But you have to put a statement out what says, you know, as far as we're concerned, this. But so far, I think the Board of Control, they're holding the nerve. They're holding the nerve, and they're doing the right thing. But there is an inevitability about this, isn't there? Whereas Ben will be back in a ring. It's like I've said to you, and I've just been kind of trying to appeal to everybody by, it has to be seen to have served a ban, even if he's already served it, even if it's a retrospective ban. It has to be seen to have some punishment alongside his name for testing positive for a banned substance, a masking agent for more serious things.
yeah, and obviously, if this fight, the Eubank one, it's on the cards, isn't it? There's too much PR gone on it for him not to capitalise, isn't there?
Too much. Well, there's a couple of things for me what's going to make the Eubank and Ben fight happen. The first one is that even though we saw a good performance from Chris Eubank a couple of weeks ago and a dominant performance beating Liam Smith, to me, he still only beats somebody who's fringe world level at best.
Yeah.
The reason I'm saying this is because if Eubank Jr. goes down the avenue of wanting to fight the big guns, and he's done it again, hasn't he? He's mentioned Canelo, and he always mentions sort of several big names. The reality is,
Triple G.
Yeah, if you put the old man, if you put Eubank in with anybody who's really anybody at 160 and 168 pounds, anybody who's top 5, top 6 in the world, these guys will still beat Eubank. He's not proven his world level by beating a guy who has looked pretty past his best, didn't he, Smith? And was he injured? Was he weight drained? Eubank was weight drained, by the way, in the first fight. I don't think there's that much to choose between a Liam Smith and a Chris Eubank Jr. I think the European level, very, very fringe world level at best in today's world. And why am I saying this? Because ultimately, the Conor Ben fight makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense because he's going to get more money for less risk than he would do if he fought one of the Charlos, for example, at 160 pound. He'd get absolutely trounced, wouldn't he?
Or Andrade,
Caleb Plant, those guys. Eubank, I've come to terms with the fact that Eubank's not at that level, and he never will be. And the result flattered to deceive last week is still, for me, the level he's at is not elite level. And I think him and Conor Ben makes complete sense from a fan's point of view. We've also got the drama of everything that happened, which makes it 5 times more controversial. We've got an interesting twist in the plot that Eubank now is the A side, and he can call certain shots, and he can call.
Throw the dad into the mix.
Yeah, throw the dad into the mix. You've got an interesting fight. All right, I don't love it, but you do have an interesting fight.
Bomac on gun charges.
Bomac on the gun charges. You've got Conor Ben. Let's ask the question what nobody else wants to ask, Russell. What's Conor Ben going to perform like when he's not on performance-enhancing drugs?
Yeah.
Because the suspicion, be careful choose my words, the suspicion is the real turnabout in his performances after the Paynard fight, when he suddenly went from, as we know, this not really a big punching, not a very durable, skinny welterweight stroke light welterweight, up to this killer of a welterweight assassin like a prime Pipino Cuevas. The suspicion is that he's been juicing for 2 to 3 years. That was the rumours in the gym. That was the suspicion of a lot of people. Suspicions what were partly proven with the 2 adverse findings. And again, sue me for that because you have failed 2 performance-enhancing drugs tests and you've done nothing to disprove that. So ultimately, what's Conor Ben going to perform like without anything enhancing in his system? So that's an interesting thing as well. So there's a lot of intangibles in this. And whilst previously when I thought, at 160 pound, I thought Eubank would have beaten Conor Ben, the reality is I'm not that sure now. I think it's a fight with more questions than answers. I do think we'll see a drop in Conor Ben's performance because I do believe he was on performance-enhancing drugs, and that's my opinion. I'm entitled to my opinion. My eyes have told me that. Subsequent test results have told me that, and nothing I've heard in the last 14, 15 months or whenever has disproved what I believe. So that is my opinion. And until I get something to the contrary, then I'll hold that view. And I think it's a fight that's bound to happen because it makes massive business. It makes sense from a domestic point of view. And I'll say this with gritted teeth, it might be a decent fight as well. It'll be a competitive, decent fight.
Do you think a welterweight fighting middle stroke super middle is dangerous?
No. I think boiling down is a lot more dangerous than moving up. I've said this repeatedly, and I seem to be in a minority because I know you've asked this question before of a lot of people, and people, for me, got the total wrong angle of the first fight with Eubank and Ben, saying welterweights fighting middleweights is dangerous. People have moved up throughout history. This has always happened, not just, had time to move up and time to adjust to the weight. I mean, Thomas Hearns was a welterweight And while he was welterweight champion, he had a couple of fights at middleweight. He moved up to 160 pounds against some pretty decent opposition. Fighters move up, Russell, you know, fighters move up without an issue. People, you know, Roberto Duran went from 9 stone 9 all the way to 12 stone. He wasn't the same fighter, of course, but other than the Thomas Hearns KO, fighters generally moving up in weight don't get knocked out badly and get hurt and maimed for life. And I'll caveat that by saying, up and down the country, okay, there'll be fights on tonight, there'll be shows on in the UK where no matter what it says on BoxRec, there's misalignment on the scales. You'll have a home fighter who might be fighting an import and giving him £7-8. This happens all the time on when fighters don't get weighed the day before. You get big weight differences. You see journeyman. I mean, I know I'm going on a little bit, but what's more dangerous? A domestic level welterweight in Conor Benn moving up to fight a domestic level middleweight in Chris Eubank Jr., or an unbeaten former elite amateur who's won 7-8 national titles fighting an import who's given away £4 or £5 and he's lost 30-40 fights and only won 2 fights. Which is the more dangerous fight?
It's obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, so if you think about boxing and think about welterweights fighting middleweights, I mean, Anthony Joshua and Usyk, yeah, they're heavyweights, but percentage-wise, there was a greater percentage-wise between AJ and Usyk. And if Usyk fights Fury, there's a massive percentage difference in those two guys. Whereas, for example, if you get a featherweight moving up to fight a lightweight, that's £9, 9 stone versus 9 stone 9. So percentage-wise, that's what, 7, 8, 9%. But you get heavyweights who are 14.5, 15.5 stone fighting guys who are 19, 20 stone. No one gets hurt. Where fighters get injured, it's really simple. Fighters, of course, we have weight divisions for a reason before anybody jumps in, but, you know, Ray Leonard moved up to fight Marvin Hagler. Sugar Ray Robinson moved up from welterweight to middleweight to light heavyweight to fight Joey Maxim. You know, this happens, fighters move up, but where fighters get hurt is boiling down to a weight that they haven't been for some time, like Eubank Jr., £157. That was criminal. That was absolutely criminal, was that. And I know we did a video about it. Mismatches, fighters not being in shape. Fighters like Dave Allen last week or the week before, whenever it was, not been in shape, Russell. That's when we get people hurt. When fighters are in the ring and they're not conditioned and they haven't been active, they're being inactive. That's when we get fighters hurt. Mismatches, the whole lot. People moving up a weight division or 2 weight divisions, it's no biggie. All right, yeah, the natural advantage would be seen to be with the heavier guy. But we've got Charlo, haven't we? Charlo's fighting Canelo, who's now a fully fledged super middleweight in reality. And he's moving up from 11 stone to 12 stone. And whilst I don't think he'll win that fight, I'll put money on it that Charlo will be competitive and he won't get ragged around.
Yeah, and don't forget Canelo won at light heavyweight, didn't he?
Exactly. So yeah, exactly. So Canelo's been up at 12-7. You know, I've been in the gym so many times and seen, you know, good kids kids like Warrington at 9 stone, you know, pummel light welterweights in the gym. Because if you're good enough, you're good enough. I think the Ben Eubank thing's slightly different because there's not that too much between them. I think maybe Eubank's got a bit of an edge in terms of his skill set. But like I said, fighters have moved up through history and there might be some data to disprove me and maybe I'm missing out a couple. But generally, if both fighters are fit, they've allowed the smaller guys some time to train at that weight. There shouldn't be a major issue. Yeah, we do have weight divisions for a reason, but some weight jumps are not that big, and some are. It just depends. If you look at we get like flyweights, don't we? And then we get light flyweights. You get a guy who's £3 difference between the two. It's no biggie.
Do you think this rivalry, this Ben Eubank, you know, Junior, the sons, obviously, I think this is now bigger than the fathers, do you think? It's
certainly not at that level, is it? I mean, I was at the first Ben and Eubank fight. I was a Ben fan, ironically. I was a student. I was at the NEC in Birmingham. And that was real tension. That was those guys. It wasn't what we call, what we now know as fake beef. That was genuine dislike. I certainly think Nigel Benn hated Chris Eubank Senior. I think he literally hated him at the time. I think he was everything that he didn't want to be. But is it now a genuine rivalry? I don't know. I think Ben's riled. He's completely riled now, isn't it? Because Eubank said some pretty funny things, hasn't he? And whenever those guys got together talking, Eubank always seemed to be a lot smarter and a lot more articulate and seemed to have the verbal edge over Conor Benn. And I think that's riled Conor Benn. I did like what Eubank said last week when he says, Conor Benn says this and says that. And he says, I think the juice has really still affected him. I thought that was absolutely hilarious. He's not as good a fight, Russell. Neither son are anywhere near as good as the fathers. But it's a big fight. It's a big rivalry. And the irony is, it's a funny one, actually, because Conor Benn was really sort of the fan favourite before the drug scandal. And for whatever reason, the general audience doesn't get Chris Eubank Jr. I think they think he's a little bit pompous. I mean, I've heard that myself about me. It's just it's funny. But I think they think he's a bit pompous, the way he articulates himself and the way he behaves. And I don't think he is. But what's happened is you've almost had that role reversal, haven't you? You've had Eubank Jr., who looked out in that fight. It didn't happen for him. And then he went in with Liam Smith and he got levelled. So that was like awful for Eubank Jr. It was like, oh, wow, he didn't deserve that. And then you've got Conor Benn, who's still this kind of like anti-hero, and people still seem to love Conor Benn. But there's been a turn against him, hasn't there, generally with fighters and people within the sport. So I don't know. I think you're going to get boos on both sides, but I'd like to think that the moral favourite will be Chris Eubank Jr. I'd like to think that, but I wouldn't be surprised if Conor Benn gets the bigger cheers, seriously.
Where do you think they'll put it on at?
It'll be a stadium fight, won't it? But they're talking about a stadium fight in December. So I don't know.
Talking Wembley, aren't they?
Could be Wembley, but Wembley in December. Wow, who knows? But is he going to be licensed by then? Because look, you and I touch on this, and you mention this every video, and it's brilliant about, he still hasn't got a date, has he? He says he's fighting next Saturday, and if he does, he does, right? Whatever. But he was fighting in March, wasn't he? Yeah. Then he was fighting June the 3rd. Then they put it back to June the 17th. And now they're telling us September the 23rd. They keep moving the dates. So ultimately, there are two parts to this. There's the part that he still hasn't been licensed to fight in the UK. And it's only a massive, massive fight in the UK. It's a big fight in the States. I'm not even going to discuss the Saudi thing with them because it doesn't look like the Saudis are going to play with Eddie, does it, for big fights? So it's not a big fight in the States, Russell. It's only a big fight in the UK. So there's two parts to that. One, does Conor Benn get cleared by December? He might do, he might not do. But the second part to that is Chris Eubank's now the A side. Does he want it in December? He might decide he wants to wait. You don't know. He might decide there's a bigger fight out there. I don't think there is, but he might decide there's a bigger fight out there or another avenue that he wants to go down. You don't know. So what we're hearing, really, there's been a little bit from Calla, but what we're hearing is what we always hear, Russell. We're only ever hearing noise from Eddie, aren't we? Just like the Wilder Joshua thing I know we're going to touch on, and just like everything else, we're only hearing noise from Eddie. We're looking at December. We're working towards December. December. This is what Eddie does. He drowns you out with dates and these vibes all the time. But unless I've missed it, because I'm not really actively looking for this stuff on social media, has Chris Eubank said, I want to fight Conor Benn in December?
No, he hasn't.
No, I don't think he has either. So it's just the same as when he was saying Fury and AJ is a done deal. It's a done deal, 2-fight deal. We've done it. Never heard from Bob, did we?
No. Does Eubank hold all aces now then?
I think he does. If I were Chris Eubank Jr. personally, I'd be like, I've had a tough year. I've had 2 good fights with Liam Smith. I'm going to take the rest of the year out. That's what I would be doing. I'd be resting, taking the year out. I'll say, Connor, little man, little welterweight, I'll fight when I'm ready. I'm the A side. You don't tell me when we're fighting. I'll tell you when I'm ready. And that's what I would do. But the danger we've got there, and the worry we've got there, is he's got Callie Sowland who looks after him, who's dribbling over the thought of this fight again now, isn't he? Even,
Callum's knocking him on out, isn't he?
had Eubank been beaten by Smith again, they were still going to do this, and he was still dribbling and drooling. And you'd like to see a little bit more core strength and character from Callie, wouldn't you? Just by saying, Eddie, stop saying it's going to happen in December. We'll let you know if we're ready to do this fight, and when we do it, it'll be on our terms and where we want to have it. But it's unbelievable that Eddie's still the mouthpiece, isn't he, for all these fights?
Yeah. And Conor Benn's not got a belt.
Got nothing, has he? He ain't got a ranking, he ain't got a belt, he ain't got an opponent. I said to my lad, Kelsey, earlier, so I'm doing a Zoom tonight with your Uncle Russell, and I says, what do you think to Conor Benn's next opponent? And Kelsey just laughed and he said, apparently he's an ex-Floyd Mayweather, Dad. He's that quick, nobody's seen him. He said, have you seen him? I went, no. The invisible opponent, the invisible venue. Let's wait and see.
You think it'll be on like Orlando?
Initially, I'm like, Conor Benn's not fighting. He's not fighting. But it wouldn't surprise you for them to just slip it on that show. You know, kind of not put too much noise around it. Slip it on the show. Let him blast someone out in 2 rounds who's, you know, got 1 arm and 2 left feet. Put him in an easy fight. Let him get whatever rust he's got off and see what the public reaction is. Instead of doing this massive blazing PR thing saying he's definitely fighting, he's going to be a main event or a co-main event. If I were looking after them and I would be belligerent and ignore the border control, I would probably take that approach. Russell, I'll probably put him on a quieter show and do it a little bit quieter and then just see what the reaction is to that.
Imagine if they did that right and didn't want anybody to know, and then he got flattened.
Oh, do you know what?
In Orlando.
I'm showing my true colours now. I'm showing my prejudice, because I'd love it. It'd be like the best thing. I can't hide it. I'm smiling at the thought of it, but I can't hide it. And it's just because the hype around this kid, the people defending him.
He's not endeared himself, has he, to fans?
Oh, he's just like the videos of him and his dad when Chris Eubank Jr. Got knocked out the first fight with Smith, and they were laughing. I mean, if you were serving a drugs ban or you couldn't box, you wouldn't be laughing on social media, would you? You'd be a bit of humility, a little bit of embarrassment, and you kind of sit quietly. But they can't help themselves, can they? Because ultimately they're thugs. They're obnoxious thugs, the pair of them. And the only difference with Nigel and Conor is at least Nigel fought his way up from not a lot. Obviously, he was a former soldier. But Conor, not only is Conor a thug and he's obnoxious, he's also an entitled little brat. Yeah, he just doesn't. I've said this before to Max. Talked to Max about Conor Benn a while ago, and I said he just doesn't have any redeeming features, and that sounds quite callous of me, and that sounds quite hostile. But he's got no redeeming features about him whatsoever. He's just the way. The video that went online about how he was with his girlfriend, how he was looking at her and how he was really angry with her and talking to her, and because she dare speak and she dare have a little bit of an exchange with Coogan, and he went really hostile and really kind of cold, and I just don't think he's a nice character. I really don't. You know, if one of my daughters brought him home, he wouldn't be getting over my front door, buddy.
Yeah, it's he doesn't endear himself, does he, young Ben? Maybe it might just be playing pantomime villain. He might be a nice kid. He
might be a dickhead as well, Russell. He might be. Listen, he might be. He doesn't behave in a nice way. And you know me, you've heard this all the time. Right, I'm going at Conor Benn, I don't care, right? But you've heard this all the time, right? Because I don't like drug cheats and I don't like entitled people, and I don't like people with a superiority complex. Now, he absolutely has a superiority complex. I remember, I know Robin Deakin can be naughty and cheeky. We can't forget I was laughing at Robin Deakin's disability and holding his phone up on social media showing disabled babies with disabilities and club feet. And, you know, him and his friends laughing at that, laughing at Robin Deakin and showing photographs of disabled babies. I mean, is that someone who really endears themselves to the general public? We all make mistakes. We all say and do things we shouldn't do. But I find him hostile. I find him arrogant. I find him contentious. And I just don't find him a nice person. I'm sorry, Gareth A. Davis. I know you want to bath him and you think he's the nicest lad ever and you love him. And Simon George, but we really love Conor Benn. We just hope this gets cleared up. No one will speak the truth and say, do you know what? I think he's a bit of a brat, actually. I don't think he's a particularly nice person. And again, Russ, it's my opinion. Yeah. People watching this who love Conor Benn might say, that Julian's an absolute arsehole, and that's fine as well. That's I've got no issue with that. Absolutely fine. But he does nothing to redeem himself to the public. I find him quite a cold fish. And people come out with this, the best for the best. I mean, look, all right, I go on too much about Conor Benn. You start me off. You could have started off with a Fury and Usyk thread, but you start me off. But who can forget when we were going through a pandemic and people lost their lives, the loved ones, the livelihoods, the homes and everything. And he's flashing about his 250 quid Rolex when we're all going through this horrific time. And he's out there spending money and getting performance cars wrapped and showing his Rolexes and his rings and his wealth and the best for the best. I mean, maybe that's just the ignorance of youth. Maybe he's just been badly advised. Or maybe, as I've said, he's just a contemptuous, just spoiled brat who's not a particularly nice person. And harsh or not, I think we'll hear things about Conor Benn in the future. No, not great things. Not great things. I think things will come out and we'll hear things. And that's just an instinct based on knowing and recognizing narcissists. You know, I've read a lot about narcissism and people with various personality traits and personality disorders. I read stuff like that, and I'm really going hard now. I know I am, and I might be wrong. You know, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I think things will come out about Conor Benn, about the way he treats people, that will not endear him anymore to people. I don't see this nice kid. Never spoke to him in my life. I don't see the nice kid that Gareth A. Davis and Simon Jordan see. I don't see it. There's been too many things he's said and done. And I really tried to give the kid a chance, you know, like you and I were talking, and I said, but he's massively improving, Russell. Yeah. Maybe he's better than we think he is. Maybe we should give him a chance. You know, he's exciting. I genuinely, anyone who's just listened to the last 15 minutes think, McGowan, you talk garbage. I genuinely tried to like Conor Benn. I genuinely tried to like him, and I just can't warm to him at all. Can't warm to him. You imagine him being a classroom bully, and I won't go into detail, but you and I have got our own struggles with our own children, haven't we?
Yeah.
And you know the kind of kid who you dread being in the same class as your child?
Yeah.
That's him. That's Conor Benn, mate. That's probably why I get so
Conor Benn and Eddie Hearn.
Conor Benn, and in fact, I was on YouTube the other day, and Jodie Marsh popped up, you know, about Eddie bullying her, about her looks and her features. I know we're going to move on to the next video in a few seconds, but I saw that and I watched the short what Jodie Marsh went through. And whilst that might be just her view and her side of the story, I didn't find that difficult to believe at all.
Yeah. Madness, isn't it?
Wankers, mate. Wankers.
Right. Okay, then we'll go to the next part. Yeah.
Okay, buddy. Speak soon.